Hi everyone, I wanted to make a quick video that will kind of give some background information on the big Final Fantasy opera scene. This is featured in the chapter from Will Cheng's book that we're looking at for this unit. And the Final Fantasy opera uses a lot of tropes from classical opera. And so I thought I would go through and explain a little bit about the history of opera, a little bit about where this is coming from, in order to prepare you to watch the scene and get as much out of it as you can. So opera, of course, is a form of sung drama. And it's been around for more than 400 years now. The first opera is generally cited as Jacopo Peri's Daphne. Daphne is unfortunately lost, so Eurydice is the earliest example that we have. But the most famous early example, and the one that's still performed today, is Claudio Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, or Orfeo. So it's the same story as Orpheus and Eurydice. And all of these operas in the beginning were based off of Greek myth. Peri is involved in a group of people that are called the Florentine Camerata, during the Renaissance, and they're artists and thinkers and poets and statesmen and politicians and businessmen who are very interested in sort of restoring the glory of ancient Greek art. And so one of the ideas that they really latched onto was that we think that Greek drama was sung, and so we should have new forms of drama that actually echo that. We should have dramas that are sung throughout in order to imitate ancient Greek theater. And so early operas tended to be focused on mythological subjects. So I've given the front page of Orfeo here, the score. You can see it says at the top, Orfeo, a fable in music by Claudio Monteverdi, presented in Mantua, a neighboring city. And it's dedicated to the most serene, I suppose, patron Francesco Gonzaga, the Duke of Mantua. So Orfeo is on a mythological subject, but as opera evolved and continued, it began to be treated also just as drama was. So playwrights and poets would write the book for new operas, and now famous composers would write the music to them, and they would be posed as new stories, or perhaps adaptations of newer stories, and still some mythological subjects from various cultures that we'll get to. So there are a couple of very specific types of singing that you will hear in opera. As I said, opera is generally sung throughout. There are some forms, like the German Singspiel, a sung play. There are some forms where there is dialogue, but generally when we say opera, we mean a drama, a production that is sung throughout. So the first type of singing you'll hear is the aria. Aria is simply Italian for air, and this just means a song. It's, a character singing a song just as you would see on Broadway today. Recitative generally fills the role of speech. So you'll see that operas, including the excerpt from Figaro, tend to have, scenes of a couple of minutes of recitative, this kind of very rapid singing that sort of takes the place of dialogue. And then it will usually go into some kind of an aria, sometimes an ensemble where multiple singers are singing together. Recitative sort of comes in two forms. In Figaro, you're going to hear a lot of secco recitative, or dry recitative. And this is a recit that is accompanied only by a keyboard, or sometimes by a simple stringed instrument, or a couple of instruments. This group of instruments is called the continuo, and they're sort of the bass section or the accompaniment section of the orchestra. You could think of the rhythm section in jazz. A couple of players who sort of have a bass line and some chords, and they provide the accompaniment. Then we also have accompanied recitative, which is sort of much more dramatic, uses a larger ensemble or even the entire orchestra. And when we get to our second example from Wagner, you will hear more accompanied recitative. I bring these up because you'll also hear clearly an aria right in the middle of the Final Fantasy opera sequence. That's actually the most famous aspect of it. You'll see this sort of castle rooftop, and the main character comes out and she sings an aria. Then a little bit at the beginning, but then especially at the end of the opera scene, you'll see something that seems to imitate recitative, particularly accompanied recitative. It's not very melodic, but it still has some music to it. And I think because of the way that they were using the Super Nintendo to imitate voices, they didn't fully do a secco recitative, but they have simple orchestral accompaniment sort of sustaining the drama, and then it's clear that the characters who are speaking are sort of doing a recitative style thing rather than an ensemble or an aria. The other concept to keep in mind is the notion of bel canto. Bel canto just means beautiful singing, and it's a style that was very popular just after 1800. It's associated with Italian opera in particular, and bel canto was the idea that you could showcase the beauty of the singer's voice by writing sort of simple but beautiful tunes that would show off how nice their voice sounds, would sort of give them the flexibility if they wanted to go, you know, for extra high notes or do a little bit of improvisation, some sort of vocal turns and things like that, just like a lot of singers do today. Bel canto was a style of simple, beautiful, melodic and harmonic writing that was really supposed to feature the singer. And this is sort of clearly, to me, the style that the Final Fantasy aria is trying to go for. So then I just want to talk a bit about a couple of broad types of opera to give you a bit of an introduction that you can also carry beyond this class. Comic opera, as I said, we start to see operas that are simply being written and performed like plays. You would write a new opera, premiere it in a big city, and it doesn't have to be a resurrection of a mythological story or a recreation of an existing story. And so comic operas, which were especially popular in the 1770s, 80s, 90s, and onward, a lot of times they're sort of social satires. They're often filled with sort of broad stage comedy. It's sometimes a very old-fashioned style of comedy, but it's a lot of the same things that you'll see in early film comedy, you know, the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges. There's a lot of physical comedy. There's a lot of satire on sort of social class, gender relationships, you know, romances in general. You'll see a lot of operas like the one we're going to see that are set in sort of households where you have an upstairs-downstairs thing going on, where you have pre-existing power structures between the characters. A lot of the comedy comes out of that. A lot of the tension comes out of that. You see a lot of mistaken identities. You see a lot of disguises, you know, where someone simply puts on an opera mask and nobody knows who they are, and then it's revealed, oh, it was the Countess all along, you know. There's sort of secret relationships. There are a lot of dramatic revelations of, oh, so-and-so is actually their father, or so-and-so is a long-lost sibling, and things like that. And there's lots of cross-dressing and sort of big, broad strokes comedy. So we're going to look at a little clip from The Marriage of Figaro, which is by Mozart from 1786. It's one of the most famous comic operas, and it's centered on a noble household. So Figaro, the male protagonist, and Susanna, the romantic lead, are engaged to be married. They are the servants of the Count and the Countess, and then there's a sort of supporting cast around them. There's a doctor, there's a music teacher, there's Cherubino, this sort of boy who hangs around. And so we're going to see an ensemble scene that has some recitative and then some ensemble singing that really exemplifies a lot of this style. So Cherubino is this boy. He begins the scene. He's just sort of been singing about how he doesn't know who he is. He's sort of overwhelmed by teenage life. And Susanna, who's a little bit older, is sort of trying to help him, trying to talk him through things. He also has a crush on Susanna. And so when Susanna hears the Count coming, you know, she can't be seen at this time period. She can't be seen with a boy in her room. So Cherubino hides behind the chair, and the Count talks to her, and the Count is in love with her, even though he's married. And she has no interest in the Count, but there's sort of this social pressure that the Count is her employer. And so, you know, he wants to be with Susanna. So he is once again trying to seduce Susanna. Don Basilio, the music teacher, sort of sees what is going on. He loves to gossip. He loves sort of exposing all of these relationships. And so he comes in, and the Count, is confronted, and the Count wants to hide. And so Cherubino has to move. And gradually throughout the rest of the scene, the Count is revealed, and Cherubino is revealed, and Basilio, you can just see him literally look at the audience and go, "Oh, this is better than I ever would have thought." He's just delighted in all of the social awkwardness. But this scene really exemplifies both the musical style in terms of the recitative and the ensemble singing, and kind of the plot and the comedic style that you'll see a lot of in comic opera.
Susanna, tu mi sembri agitata e confusa.
Signore, io chiedo scusa, ma se mai mi sono presa per carità partite.
Un momento, e ti lascio oggi.
No, nulla.
Due parole. Tu sai che ambasciatore a Londra il re mi dichiarò di condurre con Figaro destinato.
Signore, se osassi...
Parla mia cara, e con quel dritto c'oggi prendi su me finché tu vivi, chiedi, imponi, prescrivi.
Lascia, signor, dritti non prendono né vogliono né che no. Oh, che felice.
Ah no, Susanna, io ti vo far felice. Tu ben sai quanto io t'amo. A te, Basilio, tutto già disse. Ma senti, se per pochi momenti me qui in giardin sull'imbrunir del giorno, per questo favore io pagherei.
È uscito poco fa.
Chi parla? A te! E sì, al fondo non entri.
Io mi lasci qui solo.
Dama, e sarà. Vado a cercarlo.
Qui dietro mi porrò.
Non mi celate.
Taci, e cerca che parla.
Che fai?
Susanna, il ciel vi salvi. Avresti a caso veduto il conte?
E cosa deve farmi qui il conte? Andiamo uscite.
Aspettate, sentite, Figaro di lui cerca.
Oh cielo! E cerca che dopo voi più l'odia.
Veggiam come mi serve.
Io non ho mai nella moral sentito uno chiama la moglie o il marito per dir che il conte va.
Sono finiti il ministro della tua esplenatezza, il motivo della vostra morale e il conte del suo amore.
Non c'è alcun male, a ciascun i suoi gusti. Io mi credea che preferir doveste per amante come fan tutte quante un signor liberal prudente e saggio a un giovinastro, a un paggio.
Cherubino?
Cherubin d'amore, oggi sul mar del giorno passeggiava qui d'intorno per entrare.
Oh, Maria, come posto lei come sta?
Un maligno con voi che ha gli occhi in testa. E quella canzonetta, ditemi in confidenza, io sono a lingue d'altrui nulla dico. E per voi, per madama, a proposito figlia, istruitelo meglio, e lì la guarda a tavola sì spesso, e con tali modestia che se il conte s'accorge che sul tal punto, sapete, egli è una bestia.
Scellerato! E per beata che voi per giorni sorgendo!
Io, che ingiustizia! Quel che compro io vendo, a quel che tutti dicono io non aggiungo un pelo.
Come? Che dicon tutti?
Oh, bella!
Oh, cielo!
Cosa sento? Tosto
o mio signor.
Sono presa dal devo.
Andate, andate.
Al punto son.
Aspettate, sedutor.
Perdonate, o mio signor.
Mi scherzo, sono presa dal devo.
Agiazienda poverina, oh mio Dio, le batte il cor. Oh mio Dio, le batte il cor. Oh mio Dio, le batte il cor. Pian piano in su questo seggio.
Cosa di
Siamo qui per aiutarvi e sicuro il vostro onor. E sicuro il vostro onor. E sicuro il vostro onor. Ah, nel paggio quel che ho detto era solo un mio sospetto.
Io non sia una bambina, non vedere il pastore, non vedere il pastore, il pastore, il pastore.
Parta, parte da Merino.
Poverino,
Parta, parte da Merino.
poverino,
Poverino, poverino, ma da me sorpreso ancor.
E come
Da tua cugina l'uscio ier trovai rinchiuso. Picchio, m'apri barbarina, paurosa fuor dell'uso. Io dal muso insospettita guardo, cerco in ogni sito e alzando pian pianino il tappeto al tavolino vedo il paggio. Ah, cosa faccio?
ah, meglio ancora.
Oh, mestissima signora,
accadendo di me,
or capisco come va.
giusti dei che ne sarà,
Così
Oh, mestissima signora, or capisco come va.
Not all operas were funny, though. Dramatic operas are a tradition that goes back to the very beginning. You know, the earliest mythological subjects, the sort of recreations of ancient Greek art, were all fairly serious. A lot of times they had sort of moral endings, they had tragedies, where their hero's tragic flaws would be their undoing in this very Aristotelian way. Dramatic opera and tragedy, opera seria, we call it serious opera, is a style that flourishes throughout the 19th century. And then Richard Wagner, German composer, sort of develops his own style, which he calls music drama. Wagner is interested in this idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which is this great compound German word. It just means complete, Gesamt, Kunst, art, work, Werk. Gesamtkunstwerk, the complete artwork. And he had this idea that you should have serious works of art that would combine sort of painting and stage design and singing and poetry and art, you know, and architecture, that you would bring these all together. Wagner is famous for, you know, building the first modern theater in Bayreuth, Germany, that would be, you know, it would have the ability to turn the lights down. The orchestra was hidden for the first time in the orchestra pit to kind of create this total immersion of the audience. A lot of times before, even when people were seeing the, you know, comic operas of the 1700s, opera and concert going was a social occasion. You know, you could talk throughout it. People, especially in the cheap seats, would just be sort of gossiping and drinking and fighting and whatever. And the focus, you know, people liked the music, people liked to listen to the music, but the focus was also very social. It was a place to see and be seen and to interact in society. Whereas Wagner says, no, there should be total attention to my complete artwork, my complete vision of these fully sung music dramas. So the realization of this is what's called the Ring Cycle, which is a set of 4 operas from the late 1800s. You know, they're 3 or 4 hours each, and to this day you can go to Bayreuth and see the Ring Cycle put on. You know, you can go on 4 consecutive nights and see all of them, or I suppose you could do a sort of couple-day marathon, just like watching Star Wars or Lord of the Rings all the way through. But people still do this. And so it's a set of 4 operas that tell a big story from Norse mythology. We're going to hear a couple of little excerpts from Die Walküre, which is the second opera. So I'm going to play a little bit of the overture, which, just like a Broadway show, most operas will open with a piece of music, and you'll hear exactly that in Final Fantasy as well. In Wagner, you will hear this dramatic music that sets the stage of a storm, and Siegmund, our hero, is running from his enemies. And similarly, in the Final Fantasy opera, you're going to hear a very dramatic, loud overture that kind of sets the stage for this tale of war that is going on. Then we'll watch a little clip of 2 of the main characters. And so the 3 characters that are in Act 1 here, we won't see all of them, but there's Siegmund, the hero, who's been, you know, running, and he takes refuge in this great house. Sieglinde, a woman, greets him. You know, she says, this is my husband's house. You know, she wants to help him. She wants to help Siegmund. And throughout the scene, they're kind of realizing, like, oh, you're so familiar. I feel this connection to you. And then Hunding, the owner of the manor house, appears, and he reveals to Siegmund, you know, I'm one of the enemies. I was one of the men trying to kill you. And because of our customs, you know, you've come to my house on this stormy night. I will let you stay the night, but we're going to fight in the morning, and I'm going to kill you. So he goes away, and Sieglinde drugs his drink so that he will fall into a deep sleep. And Siegmund and Sieglinde are kind of doing this Luke and Leia thing, where they're kind of they're falling increasingly in love with each other, and they have this passion, and then they realize, no, we are, you know, brother and sister. And so in the middle of Hunding's manor is this great tree, and Sieglinde tells Siegmund, you know, I was forced into this marriage, and on our wedding night an old man appeared, and he buried this sword in the tree that grows through the manor house, and said, you know, that the hero who comes to take this sword out of the tree will save me. And so Siegmund goes to the tree, and he pulls out the sword. And that's the end of Act 1. So we're going to watch a little bit of that sequence, and along with the general musical style, which is more dramatic than in Figaro, probably a little bit closer to what we hear in the other sequences of the Final Fantasy opera, other than the famous aria. I also want you to listen for this idea of a leitmotif. Wagner really pioneered the style of composition that associates a certain theme with a certain character, or a certain theme with an idea like love or death or fate, or in this case the sword. You're going to hear a lot of the sword motif, which goes bum ba bum ba bum ba ba. So you're going to hear that as they're singing about the sword, and then when Siegmund pulls it out of the tree, you hear it very triumphantly. And so this is a style of composition that's very familiar from film music today. You know, lots of 20th, 21st century composers. You can think again of Star Wars, how different characters get their own themes, or there's the Force theme or the Empire theme. That's a style that's very indebted to this form of operatic composition. So let's first hear a little bit of the overture that sets the mood, and you'll hear how very different this is from Figaro. now let's hear a little bit from the end of Act 1 with Siegmund and Sieglinde declaring their love, realizing their relationship to one another, and Siegmund pulling the sword out of the tree.
Drängt zu Tat und errat